The foam plate in my daughter's hands was still empty when my father reached across the table for a second helping of prime rib and told the waitress, "The kids' table's fine as it is." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just watched my 11-year-old son count the folding chairs at that card table in the corner, out loud, under his breath, the way you count something you're trying hard not to feel. My name is Denise Marsh, and this isn't a sob story. This is the accounting I finally did after 12 years of being told there wasn't enough to go around. I should tell you what my life looked like before that Saturday in April, because none of it looked like a woman waiting for a fight. I get up at 4:40 in the morning, 6 days a week, and I do it in a duplex on the east side of Harlow Falls, Indiana, in a kitchen with a coffee maker that takes 2 tries to catch. I make my living as a freelance bookkeeper. 6 hours a week for the public library. A standing contract with a heating and air company called Reliable, whose owner still pays me in a paper check because he doesn't trust the internet with his money. A little bit of work for a used bookstore 2 blocks from the courthouse called Chapter and Verse, run by a woman who pays me partly in cash and partly in hardcover mysteries my daughter reads twice as fast as I can buy them. Harlow Falls isn't a big town, 12,000 people last count, the kind of place where the Dollar General parking lot doubles as a meeting spot and everybody still remembers whose truck is whose. My days run the same shape most weeks. I do a first pass on the library's books before the doors open at 9. I answer 3 or 4 calls for Reliable between loads of laundry. And most nights, I close out Chapter and Verse's register from a laptop at my own kitchen table while Cass reads on the floor beside me, sounding out words from whatever paperback she's decided is hers that week. I clear about $2,400 most months, some months less, and I've gotten good, the way you get good at anything you have no choice about, at making that number stretch further than it should. Saturdays are for whatever's free. The splash pad at Kennard Park in the summer, which doesn't cost anything as long as you bring your own towels. The library, obviously, where I already know every librarian by name and my kids have their own regular chairs. Once a month, if the numbers allow it, Culver's for frozen custard, and Cass always orders the same thing, a kid's cup of turtle sundae, and always acts surprised when it arrives like she didn't order the exact same thing the month before. None of this is a complaint. I want to be clear about that. It was just the shape of things, ordinary and a little bit tight, the kind of tight a lot of people would recognize immediately, and a few people, the ones who have never had to do this kind of math, would probably call something else. I have 3 kids. Mia is 14 and keeps a running list, in a spiral notebook, of things she's going to do once she's grown and gone. Jonah is 11 and can tell you the win-loss record of every Indiana Pacers season since he was 7, whether you ask him to or not. Cass is 7 and sleeps with 4 stuffed rabbits in a row, in an order she rearranges every single night for reasons she has never once explained to me. Their father left 6 years ago, in March, 7 months after we buried my mother. I don't say that to link the 2 events like one caused the other. I say it because that's how the years actually stack up in my head, one flat fact on top of another, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of lie. When my marriage ended, my father's first question wasn't how I was doing. It was whether I'd be able to keep the house, which I couldn't, not on one income, and I moved the kids into the duplex 4 months later without much help from anyone but Aunt Pat and a church group that showed up with a truck one Saturday. Karen and Todd, by contrast, had helped my parents refinance their own mortgage 2 years before that, quietly, the kind of favor that gets remembered at every holiday since, mentioned sideways, the way my father might say, well, Todd's always been good to us, in the middle of an unrelated conversation about something else entirely. I don't think my father sat down and decided, in so many words, to love one set of grandkids more than the other. I think it happened the slow way most favoritism happens, one convenient decision compounding into the next, until compound interest built a whole habit nobody ever had to say out loud. My mother's name was Arlene Bell. For 22 years, she ran a fabric and notions shop on 4th Street called Bell's, with a bell over the door that she polished by hand every Friday, and a back room that smelled like starch and cedar, and the orange hand soap she kept by the cutting table. She died of ovarian cancer 6 years ago this past January, at 68 years old, in a hospital bed, We'd moved into her own living room so she could see her garden through the window. My father is Roy Bell. He ran Bell Hardware on Route 9 for 41 years, sold it to a regional chain 3 years ago when his knees finally told him no, and turned 70 this past April. That birthday is where this story actually starts, though I didn't know it yet. Sitting in my car in the parking lot of Fielder's Steakhouse that afternoon, checking my lipstick in the visor mirror, and telling my kids to be on their best behavior for Grandpa. My sister is Karen Whitcomb. She's 2 years older than me, married to a man named Todd who owns Whitcomb Auto Group, 3 used car lots strung along the highway between here and Anderson. They live in a subdivision called Forest Glen, in a house with a 3-car garage where one of the bays is permanently full of things they haven't gotten around to selling at their own yard sale. I want you to have that detail, because it would be easy for me to tell you my sister lives in some kind of palace, and she doesn't. Her leather couches are real leather and also 11 years old with a rip on one arm that Todd covers with a folded blanket. Money moved differently in their house than in mine. It did not move like a fairy tale. Fielder's Steakhouse is the kind of place Harlow Falls considers fancy, which means cloth napkins and a banquet room in the back that smells like garlic bread, no matter what's actually on the menu that night. My father rented that room for his 70th birthday and invited 40 people. Cousins, old customers from the hardware store who still called him Mr. Bell, the pastor from First Christian. My kids put on their good clothes for it. Mia wore a dress she'd saved her own babysitting money to buy. Jonah wore a collared shirt that used to be his cousin Ryder's. Cass wore a headband with a bow that kept sliding sideways, and she kept pushing it back into place with 2 fingers the entire ride over, proud of it in a way that still makes my chest hurt when I think about it. 40 people filled that banquet room by 6 o'clock, standing 3 deep near the gift table, and I spent the first 20 minutes doing what I always do at these things, making the rounds, hugging cousins I only see twice a year, thanking the pastor for coming, keeping half an eye on Cass so her headband bow didn't end up in somebody's punch. My father was in his element, working the room the way he used to work the counter at Bell Hardware, a hand on every shoulder, a story ready for every face. Karen and Todd came in 15 minutes after us, Sophie already on her phone, Ryder already asking where the food was. I remember thinking, watching my father light up at both his grandkids walking through the door, that this was going to be a good night. I want you to know I believed that completely, right up until the moment I didn't. When we walked in, the main table was already set. Prime rib, a carving station, a shrimp bowl the size of a bird bath, a cake with 70 candles that somebody was going to have to blow out in relays. My sister's 2 kids, Sophie and Ryder, were seated right up front, plates already full, cloth napkins in their laps. My 3 were pointed, by the woman running the event, toward a card table set up in the back corner near the coat rack. 3 folding chairs, 3 foam plates, nothing on them. An old family friend named Wanda Prout, who bought her fabric from my mother every single month for 20 years straight, was the first person besides me to notice. She caught my elbow near the coat rack and said, low enough that only I could hear it, "That doesn't look right, Denise," and I told her it was fine. "We'll get it sorted," in the automatic voice you use when you're still deciding how big a deal to make of something in front of your own kids. Wanda slipped Cass half a dinner roll off her own plate a few minutes later, without making a production of it, and it's a small thing, but I still think about that half a roll more than I think about most of what my father actually said to me that whole year. I found the event coordinator and asked politely when the kids' table would be served. She told me she was just following the seating chart she'd been handed. I found my father next, mid-conversation with an old customer, a plate of prime rib balanced on his hand, and I asked him the same question, and he looked at the corner table like he was noticing it for the first time in his life. "There wasn't enough plates, Denise," he said. Simple as that. Then he turned back to his conversation about a snowblower he'd sold somebody in 1994. I want to be fair here, because fair is the only version of this I'm interested in telling. My sister didn't design that seating chart herself. But when I found her by the cake table and asked if she'd noticed her kids were served and mine weren't, she looked at me the way you look at a coworker who's making a scene over nothing, and she said, "They're probably just running behind, Denise, don't make it a whole thing." Her son Ryder was already on his second roll. Cass tugged my sleeve on the walk back to that corner table and asked in the flat, honest way only a 7-year-old can manage. Why Sophie and Ryder got the good plates and we didn't. I told her the kitchen was running behind, which wasn't true, and she believed me because she was 7 and I was her mother, and those two facts together were still enough that year to make almost anything true if I said it in the right voice. I went back to that corner table, and I sat down with my 3 kids on foam plates with nothing on them, at a restaurant that smelled like garlic bread and prime rib at my own father's birthday, and I felt something go very still and very cold and very clear inside me, the opposite of what people expect when they hear a woman finally snapped. It wasn't rage. It wasn't tears. It was just math, the kind I do for a living, the kind where you finally stop rounding a number in someone else's favor and look at exactly what it actually is. I promised myself, sitting at that card table with an empty foam plate in front of me, that my kids would never again be told there wasn't enough for them. Not by a waitress following a seating chart. Not by anybody. What I didn't know yet, that night in the parking lot, loading 3 quiet kids back into a car with a check engine light I couldn't afford to look at, was that there had already been an actual answer to the question of enough. It had existed for 6 years. It was sitting in a filing cabinet in my father's den, and nobody had ever shown it to me. The drive home was quiet in a way that scares me more than crying does. Mia stared out the window the whole ride. Jonah asked from the back seat if Grandpa doesn't like us as much, and I told him that wasn't true, and I want to tell you I believed myself completely when I said it. I didn't, not all the way, not anymore. The weeks after that birthday were not dramatic. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this one skip the part that actually breaks a person, which is never the big scene. It's the small ones. It's a Tuesday night with $14.32 in checking, 4 days before payday, feeding 3 kids saltines with peanut butter and calling it a picnic so nobody asks why there isn't more. It's doing motel math in your head, the kind where you know the Red Roof Inn on Route 9 runs $58 a night, just in case, just so the number exists somewhere if you ever need it fast. It's being 11 days late on a $760 rent check and having a landlord who's decent about it, but who you can tell is starting to keep count. I called my father once that stretch, on a Wednesday, and asked if he could help cover half a car repair, $210 for a serpentine belt on a car that gets my kids to school and me to 3 different jobs. He said money was tight for him too right now, which might even have been true. I don't know, I never saw his own books. What I know is that 2 weeks later Sophie posted pictures from a competitive cheer camp in Michigan, and I found out later my father had covered every dollar of it himself. I didn't know about the trust yet. I didn't know there was a name for what I was watching. I just knew the math didn't add up, the same way it doesn't add up when a client's invoices say one thing and their bank statement says another. And something in the bookkeeper part of my brain filed that discrepancy away even before the rest of me caught up to it. Some weeks I'd drive 20 minutes out of my way to the Dollar General on the edge of town instead of the closer grocery store, because their off-brand mac and cheese ran 40 cents less a box, and 40 cents 4 times a week adds up to something real by the end of a month when you're doing the kind of math I was doing. I never once let my kids see me count it out loud in the checkout line, and I don't know if that was protecting them or just protecting myself from watching their faces do the math right along with me. Somewhere in that stretch I started a folder, nothing dramatic about it either, just a plain manila folder I kept in the kitchen junk drawer between the spare batteries and a church bulletin from Easter, where I started tossing anything that felt like it might matter later. Rent receipts, a copy of the custody agreement, a napkin where I'd done math on what private tutoring for Jonah would cost if we ever had it, which we didn't and probably wouldn't. I didn't know, yet that folder was about to get a lot heavier than I meant it to be. I'll tell you the one thing from that stretch I'm not proud of, because a narrator who never gets anything wrong isn't worth trusting. One night, after Cass asked for the 3rd time why we don't go to Grandpa's house as much as Sophie and Ryder do, I snapped at Mia over something that had nothing to do with her, a math worksheet left on the counter instead of in her backpack, and I said something sharp I didn't mean and can still hear myself saying. She didn't deserve that. My father's dinner table didn't belong to her either, and she carried both of those things that week, and I made it worse before I made it better. I told her I was sorry the next morning, over the same counter, and I meant it, but I still think about it. 17 days after the party, my Aunt Pat called. She's my mother's younger sister, 63 years old, lives 40 minutes east in a town called Selmont, and she'd been slowly going through boxes from my mother's house that nobody had touched in 6 years. She told me she'd found my mother's old cedar hope chest in the back of a closet and thought I should have it, since Karen already had Mom's china and the wedding ring. I drove out that Saturday and loaded it into my trunk myself, because Pat's back isn't what it used to be, and I didn't think about it again for almost 2 weeks. It sat in my living room like a piece of furniture waiting for a decision. When I finally opened it, on a Thursday night after the kids were asleep, it was mostly what you'd expect. A wedding dress folded in tissue paper going yellow at the edges. A stack of my parents' old tax returns from the 80s. A shoebox of photographs where my mother is younger in every single one than I am right now, which is its own strange thing to sit with at 11 o'clock at night. Near the bottom, under a quilt she never finished, there was a manila envelope, and inside it was a single typed letter and an old accounting ledger with a cardboard cover. The kind you'd buy at an office supply store in 1995 and never think twice about again. The letter was from my mother, dated the January before she died, addressed to my father, and it laid out, in her own plain handwriting at the bottom under a typed body, exactly what she wanted done with the money from selling her shop once she was gone. Belle's Fabric and Notions sold for $190,000 that spring, 4 months after she passed. And according to that letter, every dollar of it was supposed to go into an account for what she called, in her own words, all 5 of my grandbabies' schooling. Split even, no favorites, with my father named as the one to manage it, and a line requiring a written statement to both of his daughters, me and Karen, by January 31st of every single year. So nobody would ever have to wonder where the money went. I read that letter 3 times standing in my kitchen at 11:40 at night. I understand now that the reason my hands were shaking wasn't the money. It was the phrase "no favorites" in my mother's own handwriting, 6 years after she wasn't here anymore to enforce it. I want to be careful here, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to pretend to be one for the rest of this. What I can tell you is what I actually did, which is call a woman I used to do freelance books for named Renata, who left bookkeeping years ago to go to law school, and who now has her own small practice 2 towns over. I told her what I'd found. She told me that if my mother's letter had been formalized with an attorney, which it had, according to a name and a date stamped at the bottom, then my father had a real, enforceable duty to account for that money every year, whether he liked it or not, and that 6 missing years of statements was not nothing. I even called the number stamped at the bottom of my mother's letter, an attorney named Neil Draper 2 counties over, more out of a need to hear a stranger confirm it was real than out of any real legal strategy. His paralegal pulled the file while I stayed on hold, and when she came back, she read me the date my mother signed it, right there over the phone, in a voice as ordinary as if she were confirming a dentist appointment, and something about how unremarkable she made it sound was the moment the whole thing stopped feeling like something I might have imagined. The next 11 weeks were the quietest, most exhausting stretch of my adult life, and almost nobody around me knew it was happening. I worked my regular hours for the library, and for Reliable and for the bookstore during the day. And at night, after the kids were down, I sat at my kitchen table with that ledger and 6 years of Bell Hardware Bank statements that Renata helped me legally request, going through them line by line the way I go through anybody's books for a living. Except this time my own name was one of the numbers missing. Jonah found the folder once, by accident, digging through the junk drawer for tape for a school project, and asked me what all the numbers were for. I told him it was boring grown-up paperwork, which was true in the driest possible sense and also the biggest lie I told anybody that whole summer, because there was nothing boring about it to me at 11:30 at night with a calculator and 6 years of my father's handwriting on deposit slips. It took me most of that stretch to understand what I was looking at because my father hadn't done anything as clean as writing himself a check. He'd paid tuition directly. Crestview Christian Academy, twice a year, September and January, for both Sophie and Ryder going back 6 years. He'd covered a travel soccer league, a summer camp in Michigan. A car for Sophie's 16th birthday, paid in full, no loan. I added every line myself, on my own kitchen table, at my own kitchen calculator. And the total came to $71,400 over 6 years, every dollar of it going one direction, toward 2 of my mother's 5 grandbabies, and not 1 cent toward mine. Not this, not that, just this. My mother's letter said no favorites, my father's ledger said otherwise, and the 11 weeks in between were where I stopped being angry and started being exact. What I didn't say to anyone during those 11 weeks, not even to Renata, was how badly some nights I wanted to just let it go. Pride is a strange, expensive thing. Some part of me kept thinking that showing up with a folder full of statements and demanding an accounting from my own father would make me the difficult daughter, the one who couldn't just be grateful for what she had. And I let that fear cost me almost a full year before I finally acted on what I'd found, which is longer than I'm proud of and longer than my kids deserve to wait. Renata drafted a letter in July, formal, certified mail, requesting a full trustee accounting under the terms of my mother's own document, addressed to my father, with a copy to Karen since she was named as a beneficiary's guardian too. It went out on a Tuesday. He called me that same Thursday night, and his voice on the phone was not angry. It was tired and a little bit flat, the way it gets when he's talking about something he doesn't want to talk about at all. He asked if we could just handle this as a family at his house on Sunday. I said yes, and I brought the folder. I dropped the kids at Wanda Pruitt's house that Sunday morning, the same Wanda who'd slipped Cass half a roll months earlier, and told them it was a boring grown-up meeting, the same line I'd already used once that summer. I put on a plain blue dress I've had for 6 years and drove to my father's house with the folder on the passenger seat like it was something that might spill. I sat in his driveway for 4 full minutes before I went in, doing the same kind of steady, deliberate breathing I do before I walk into a client meeting where I already know the numbers are going to upset somebody. Because I did already know, and there was no version of that afternoon where they weren't going to be upset. That Sunday in July, 12 weeks and 4 days after my father's birthday, I sat at his dining room table with Renata beside me, my father across from us, my sister and Todd next to him, and my Aunt Pat, who'd insisted on coming once she found out what the letter in that cedar chest actually was. I laid out 6 years of bank statements and my mother's original letter, still in its yellowing envelope, on a table that used to have leaves added to it every Thanksgiving for a family that mostly still shows up. At one point, before he said a word, my father got up and walked into the den off the dining room, the same den I'd pictured for 11 weeks without ever having actually stood in it, and came back with a green hanging file folder of his own, older statements he'd apparently kept separate from the ones the credit union had already given me, as if some part of him had known this day might come and had quietly been getting ready for it the whole time. The way a man braces for a storm he still hopes will miss him. My father read it slower than anyone else at that table, longer than he needed to, I think, just to have somewhere to look that wasn't my face. When he finally spoke, he didn't raise his voice either. He said, "I didn't think you'd need it as bad as they did." That was the whole explanation. 12 words, delivered flat, like he was closing out a register at the end of a long shift, not ending 6 years of silence about $71,400 that was never his to redirect in the first place. Todd shifted in his chair the whole time Renata was talking, the way a man does when he's doing math in his head he doesn't want to say out loud yet. At one point he asked, not unkindly, whether this meant Sophie's car was somehow going to get taken back, and Renata told him no, calmly, that nobody was asking anyone to give anything back. Only that what was left get divided the way it was always supposed to be divided in the first place. Karen kept her eyes on the letter the whole time, reading my mother's handwriting at the bottom of it over and over, the way you reread a sentence hoping it'll say something different the 4th time than it said the first. Karen didn't say much at that table. Todd said even less. I understand now, in a way I didn't understand walking in that day, that the two of them had genuinely believed, all 6 years, that the tuition and the soccer league and the car were just my father being generous to his grandkids, the way any grandfather might, and that nobody had ever told them there was a document with their names on it too, sitting unread in a filing cabinet with mine. the account still had $34,600 left in it. Renata worked with an attorney to have that remainder split retroactively in a way that finally reflected what my mother's letter actually said, and my father agreed to it that same afternoon, without another argument, in the same flat, tired voice he'd used the whole time. It wasn't the full $71,400. It was never going to be. But it was something, and more than that, it was on paper now, with my mother's own signature attached to the reason why. Renata helped me set up 3 separate accounts that August, one for each of my kids, with the recovered $34,600 split evenly between them, the way my mother's letter had always intended for all 5. It wasn't college fund money exactly, not yet, but it was enough that Jonah finally joined the travel baseball league he'd been asking about for 2 years, the one that runs $340 for the fall season plus uniforms, and enough that Mia got the orthodontist appointment we'd been putting off since she was 11. Cass, being 7, mostly wanted a real bike with gears, and she got one, blue with a bell on the handlebars that she rings at absolutely nothing, at mailboxes and squirrels and her own brother, the whole length of our street. None of what came after was clean, and I don't want to tell it to you like it was, because a story where everybody hugs and understands each other by the end insults everyone who's actually lived through something like this. My father sent a card that December, at Christmas, the first one in 6 years with anything more than his signature in it. 4 lines, in his own handwriting, saying he was sorry he let things get lopsided and that he loved my 3 kids the same as the other 2. It wasn't enough, not really, not measured against 6 missing years of statements. But I kept the card anyway, because I understand now that some apologies only come in the size a person is capable of giving, and you either take that size or you take nothing. My Aunt Pat has been the one who actually changed the most. She calls Mia now, just to talk, the way she used to call my mother. She's the one who told me, months later, that she'd sat with my mother in that hospital bed the week before she died and heard her say, out loud, that she was worried Roy would let things drift back to how they'd always drifted, toward whichever daughter asked louder. Pat never told me that until it was already over, and I understand now why she waited, even if I wish she hadn't. My sister and I are not close the way people mean when they say close. She never apologized directly, not once, though a few weeks after that Sunday, she sent a text that said the girls should hang out sometime, referring to her Sophie and my Mia, and I understand now that for Karen, that text was the whole apology, translated into the only language she had for it. Her older daughter Sophie, who's 16 now, has taken to it more than her mother has. She texts Mia now about a show they both watch, and she watched Cass and Jonah for 3 hours last month, unasked, while I finished a set of quarterly books for Reliable and refused to take the $20 I tried to hand her afterward. It's a Tuesday now, almost a year past that birthday, and I'm standing in my own backyard watching Jonah try to explain the infield fly rule to Cass, who does not care even a little bit, and is instead watching our neighbor's tomato plants, which grew over the fence line this summer, and which she is absolutely certain we're allowed to pick from because the neighbor said so in June, and Cass has never once let anyone forget a promise made to her. Mia's inside at the kitchen table doing homework under a chalkboard wall the 3 of them painted themselves 2 summers ago, still covered in Cass's handwriting and Jonah's Pacer's stats, and one corner, near the bottom, where Mia wrote, in careful letters, a line from her spiral notebook list that says, "When I'm grown, I'm setting a full table." I haven't asked her to erase it. I don't plan to. My father hosts a dinner now, the first Sunday of every month, and he sets one table for it, the leaf-extended dining table my mother used to fill for Thanksgiving, with 5 place settings that don't run out halfway through. It isn't warm exactly, not the way you'd want it in the version of this story where everybody's healed all the way. Karen still checks her phone more than she talks. My father still runs out of things to say to Jonah about anything besides baseball. But Sophie and Mia sit next to each other now, without anybody assigning them there, and last month Ryder asked Cass, completely unprompted, if he could see her bike, and the 2 of them disappeared out back for 40 minutes while the rest of us ate dessert and pretended not to notice how normal it looked. There's a shelf by my sink now with 5 mismatched mugs on it, one for each of the kids and 2 of my own, none of them matching, All of them chipped at least once, and every single one of them gets used. It's a small, dumb, ordinary shelf. I think about it more than I think about the number $71,400, honestly, most days. Money was never really the point, not underneath it. The point was a foam plate with nothing on it, and whether anybody was ever going to bother to notice, and whether I was going to be the one who finally did. My bookkeeping client list has grown some too since then. Word gets around a small town fast once people hear you know your way around a set of books that badly needed reading, and I picked up a fourth client this spring, a landscaping company on the north side, which puts me closer to $3,100 most months instead of $2,400. That's not why any of this mattered. I won't pretend it doesn't help. So here's what I want to ask you, whoever's listening to this on whatever ordinary Tuesday you've got going right now. Have you ever watched your own kids get treated like they mattered a little less than somebody else's? At a table you didn't choose and couldn't control, and had to decide, quietly, on your own, whether you were going to let it stand or finally do the accounting yourself. Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and if any part of this sounded like your own kitchen table, share it with someone who needs to hear that it isn't too late to set a full plate in front of your own kids and mean it.